Modern science thinks that it has determined the exact date that Jesus Christ was crucified. And interestingly enough,
I'm glad.
Yeah, it matches up quite nicely with what the Bible already said 2,000 years ago.
Welcome to 1850 Main Street. Come on in and pull up a chair.
Today, Rob Walgate and Alan C. Duncan are joined by a good friend from the public square, Dr. Jeff Sanders.
Well, that's a relief.
Dodged a bullet on that one. Huh?
Yeah, I was really holding my breath for a long time if the Bible was true or not. Of course, I am sarcastic, you know.
Yeah. You know what, though? I do appreciate these moments. God's very gracious to us. You know, He knows that sometimes our faith can be a little shaky sometimes.
We need a little push. We need a little push in the right direction.
Yeah, so sometimes doubts can creep in. You know, sometimes our mustard seed size faith is very small, and He's very gracious, and He gives us these little. We live in a scientific age. It's like trust the science. If it's not science-y, we don't believe it. And so God is even gracious to us, knuckleheads, and He gives us these little tiny hints. Hey, psst, it was true.
I can tell you that when I was about 12 years old, I thought that the Bible was a bunch of junk and that, you know, it was probably written by a bunch of old guys stoned on pot. That's what I used to say to my friends who actually went to church or synagogue.
Well, you know what? Well, now it's mushrooms.
Oh, okay.
You know, I guess they've been saying that since the 70s, too. There's an old book from the 70s.
We knew about that back in those days. And until I saw a book on a coffee table at my house one day. I'd never seen it before. It was called Evidence That Demands a Verdict by some guy named Josh McDowell. And I turned to my father. I said, "What's this?" And he said, "Oh, you know, a friend of mine gave it to me to read, and I'm not interested in reading it." And I said, "Well, I'll look at it." And that book gave me many historical facts upon which I could rest a faith that Christ really was who He said He was.
Yeah, we've got the book over here in the control room, actually.
And it's always encouraging when science or when there is a discovery that backs up what we believe and our faith calls us to believe, or that backs up Scripture. It's that reinforcement, as you mentioned, that we need, and it also plays a pivotal role in an understanding of what the inherent word of Scripture, I mean, just fulfilling it, living it out. And I mean, in this instance, the article you brought to the table today talks about an earthquake.
Yes.
Thousands of years ago.
Yes, and we're going to get to it, I promise. But before we do, I know we've probably introed Jeff a little bit here in the beginning, but for those wondering, we've got a special guest here. This is Dr. Jeff Sanders. Those familiar with the Public Square who have been longtime listeners have heard Jeff for many years on the Public Square. But for folks who are new to 1850 Main Street, you know, Jeff will be a new voice. I know you did do a couple episodes about the Civil War.
Yeah, that was fun.
But this is your first one on the new relaunch video version of it. So it'll be new to some folks.
Cool.
We're on X, we're on YouTube, we're on Spotify in video format, hopefully soon to come to Rumble as well. But Jeff, why don't you give a little bit of a background? You are a historian, you hold PhDs. Just give us a little quick educational background.
Before I get to that, so since this is a video, I have to make sure I don't use bad facial expressions.
Yeah, sure, unless that's your thing, unless people would like to see
I'll
that.
hold back on the sarcasm. Yeah, so I have a bachelor's in history, and my minors are in Latin and in political science. Then I have a master of divinity, which is your standard 3-year seminary program. A long time ago, they used to make sure that your MDiv, you had 3 years of Greek and then 2 years of Hebrew. And I had mine a long time ago, so I have that training. And then I have a THM, a Master of Theology, which is a 4-year master's degree with a concentration or a major in Hebrew and Old Testament. And then I have a Doctor of Ministry, and the major was in pastoral ministry.
Which you served in for many decades.
Yeah, over 30 years as a pastor.
Well, so we thought you would be a perfect person to join this conversation. Rob, do you want to jump into this article a little bit? Now, I will say this as Rob's grabbing this article. This is not necessarily...
Say as Rob's grabbing his glasses.
Oh, he's got that too.
Because you can't read the article without his glasses.
That too. This is not necessarily a new article, but it's not something that I think we've thought a lot about for the past several years. This news came out in 2012, but I think it kind of flew under the radar. And so it's something that I wanted to bring back to the table because I didn't hear much about it.
Yeah, it's from the Discovery Channel. That's the source of this article. And it says Jesus, as described in the New Testament, was most likely crucified on Friday, April 3rd in the year 33. Geologists say they based their conclusion on a review of seismic activity from the region.
Isn't that fascinating? Like we can literally study earthquakes that may have happened in the region. And the reason that they're saying this is because an earthquake was said in the Gospels to have taken place when Christ was crucified. It got dark, an earthquake happened, and this was something that even the Roman centurions, well, the reason this even came up because we were doing our Bible study this morning, and that was the passage that I had. I forgot I had Bible study.
Busy weekend.
Good call, though.
Two busy weekends in a row.
You were able to just pull that together so fast.
Well, it's funny. I remembered that I'd read this story when it came out. But one of the centurions that had crucified Christ, when he saw everything that happened, he saw the earthquake, he saw it got dark, he saw how Christ forgave them while being murdered. He said, "Truly, this must be the Son of God." Mm-hmm. And so now we have modern day seismic data that this earthquake did occur.
Yeah, they studied 3 cores from the beach adjacent to the Dead Sea. And, you know, as you're studying those things, as the geologists are looking through and understanding, it's hard to believe they're able to pinpoint it to a couple thousand years ago and pinpoint it to that window of a 5-year period, I believe.
Right. Yeah. So there is some give.
But when they line that up with the scriptures, with the accounts from the Gospels, they're able to put in there on the day that the crucifixion, they believe, took place.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that in the article, it says that when all this data is factored in, a handful of possible dates result, with Friday, April 3rd, 33 being the best match. It doesn't say absolutely without any doubt it's that day, that's the day it happened. Being good historians, and we don't have all the information that we would like to have, they hedge it a little bit, and they're saying, okay, it's in this time frame. And so they say that's the best match according to the researchers.
Yes, I think that's a good, important qualifier.
Well, and there's enough things in the Bible that we can fight about with pinpoint accuracy. That we can leave out Friday, April 3rd for the time being and saying that's definitely the exact date that
so
it
if someone
took place.
thinks it was on a Thursday, April 2nd, they're still within the time frame of orthodoxy, right?
Yes,
okay,
yes,
very
according
good.
to the Bible and these studies.
Good to know.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's interesting to me how they actually did these studies is they were looking at annual layers of deposition in the sediments. You know, so you can, it's almost like a time machine, so to speak. Going back in time, you can kind of see what was happening in the region at that time.
Well, I mean, I think if people could go back in time, if Doc Brown pulled up in the DeLorean, a lot of people would pick to go to that weekend where the crucifixion took place.
Yes, they would. Well, it's funny in the movie itself. They had Christmas Day. Doc punches Christmas Day into. He said, "If you want to witness the birth of Christ," and they punch it. I think he puts in all zeros or something. I think that's what he does. Which we were talking about that date's actually a little off.
Yes, yes. According to Saint Dionysius Exiguus is the man who is credited with creating the modern day calendar that we have. So if you wonder why is all of history in the Western world divided between AD and BC. So BC is before Christ. AD does not mean after death. It does not mean that. It means Anno Domini, in the year of our Lord. And Dionysius went by the Julian calendar, which was actually created by Julius Caesar. And he said, it'd be great. He said it kind of like this. It'd be really cool, guys.
It's a rough paraphrase.
Yes, if we could divide all of history with the birth of Jesus. And so comparing the notes that he had with all of the, the reigns of the various Roman emperors, he came up with the current calendar. But unfortunately, many centuries later, we discovered that he's about 4 years off. So to blow everybody's mind, we are not truly in the year 2024. It's more like 2020. And so Jesus was actually born probably around 5 or 4 BC.
Gotcha.
We know that King Herod the Great died in the year 4 BC. That's a hard date. And we know that Jesus was born before that. So sometime between 6 and 4, and we just split the difference and say around 5 BC.
See, that's fascinating. Well, thank you for bringing that. I think we should do Christmas in America 5 BC. I think that would be an amazing. Now we have to tie America to what was happening in America in 5 BC.
But what were the old time hits that we could play that Jeff Taylor and the band from Nashville?
Jeff Taylor would find a way.
He would
find a way.
Probably a lot of harp, maybe some
harp and some drums, some flute music,
lyre,
cool.
choral stuff. You could do vocal singing. So I don't know. I'm pushing for that.
What was on the hit parade back in those days? You know? Your hit parade. I don't know.
Yeah.
Thanks for stopping by at 1850 Main Street. We're glad you're here. Do you want to learn more about what is really going on behind the scenes in public policy? Tune in to the Public Square on over 200 radio stations coast to coast. Or download the free Public Square mobile app from your app store. Just look for the lamppost. Find out what America is really talking about at thepublicsquare.com.
Well, another thing that we had I have another topic I want to talk about. And
was that a segue?
My segues are terrible. They're so bad. But you asked me, you said, how are we going to tie these two topics together? Because I'd like to talk about Notre Dame or Notre Dame. How are we supposed to even say it?
Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Can you do your R like the French do? Notre Dame.
Are we talking about the Fighting Irish in South Bend, Indiana?
You have to sound like somebody from Monty Python when you do that, you know.
Yes. Well, we all know now that it's finally been restored and reopened.
Tragic fire years ago.
Yeah, in 2019, the fire. Do we even know how it started? I think there's still.
So the story goes is that somebody's lit cigarette, or it could have been faulty electrical wiring.
Okay. The French do smoke quite a bit, right? So it could potentially have been that.
Could have been. I personally wonder if maybe it was a deliberate act. You got a lot of people in Paris who don't like the Christian faith. Just saying.
Yeah.
Just saying.
It's certainly got to be considered, I would think. But they've been working on it for 4 years, and finally, what is it? Just over this past weekend, or was it 2
over
weekends?
this past weekend?
Yeah, all the dignitaries were there last week. I believe
Donald Trump.
Was there. Joe Biden was there. People from around the world, I believe, that were there for the unveiling of the restoration, the reconstruction, in essence.
Yeah.
And the exterior, they're still working on. There's still scaffolding all around the church, or in many places around the church. It's just on the inside has been restored.
Well, and you were wondering how we were going to segue to it from the crucifixion and Good Friday. How are we going to segue to it, other than the fact that they're both Christian topics? The crown of thorns, or what many say could potentially be the crown of thorns, is held at that cathedral, and so coming from a Good Friday story, thinking about the crown of thorns, I think is quite appropriate. We talked about firefighters and clergy risked their lives in 2019 when the fire was raging to save that relic from the blaze, and I think they stored it at the Louvre for in the interim.
That's right. Yeah.
And so now it's back, and I think they built a new reliquary for it that it is stored in. And so again, we're not saying whether or not you can definitively say that is the crown of thorns,
right.
But I think they've been alluding to it since the 400s. So there is some history.
It goes back a ways, and so they also say that they have a sliver of the true cross, and that they have a nail from the cross that Jesus was crucified. Again, how do you know this, and how do you prove that? You know, and the Bible never directs me to a physical nail or a piece of cloth or a barb from a thorn and says, okay, here's the proof of why you should believe in Jesus. It never tells me. Shroud of Turin, if you want to believe in that, fine, go for it.
That's another show.
He has another show.
The Bible never...
I'm like 90% sure.
directs me to any of that for me to build my faith upon.
Yeah,
and so I just want to be clear about that.
It's not the ultimate line of defense where you're saying this is 100% accurate.
Yeah, right.
No different than saying, well, we know for sure Friday, April 3rd because the Bible tells us so. That's not the case at all.
And you had people like Martin Luther who liked to tell jokes about it in his day.
Yes, now you can say, you tried to tell this joke earlier. I said, save it for air.
So according to the story, and Martin Luther said, because he saw so many relics and people bowing down to these things and praying to these, or praying to God for these things or whatever, to be blessed by them. And he said he saw so many slivers of the true cross that you could probably build Noah's Ark out of it.
That's good.
And if you know anything about Martin Luther's humor, which is highly sarcastic, you can hear him saying that and chuckling at it.
That makes sense. It does. It's a good caution. That being said, though, I do find, we are physical beings. We like to see things. We like to touch things. We're not disembodied floating spirits. We have a spirit and a soul and a body. And so sometimes I do, and again, our faith is an incarnate faith. Our God came to earth. That's what we're celebrating this time of year, Advent, Christmas time, God coming to earth. So it also wouldn't surprise me if you took Christ's body off the cross and you saw this crown they had put on his head. It wouldn't surprise me completely if somebody saved it, pulled it aside, as especially we know the women were braver than the men in this gospel account. Yeah. And that sounds like a motherly thing to do. It sounds like a feminine thing to preserve. Now, I'm very sentimental myself. It sounds like something I would do too. But it sounds like a womanly thing to save something. To perhaps save a shroud or save a face cloth or the crown. So I don't know. I'm open to it. I'm not dogmatic on it, but I'm interested.
We have a story from the Old Testament. If you look at the Ark of the Covenant, and inside the Ark was Aaron's rod that butted in. And you had the tablets of stone and so forth. And you had the temple itself. And people got to where they reverenced the temple and they reverenced the ark. And then they even reverenced and practically worshiped the bronze serpent that Moses had. And their faith was on those relics and not on the true God. And God wiped it all out. Yeah. There is no ark. You can't find the Ark of the Covenant today. I don't care what anybody says. You can't. Where is it? Or the ark that Noah was in
Ethiopia.
Well, I think it's in my closet. Actually, I probably have it there next to some bootleg server we've got. But anyway,
no, I agree. I think that is the danger. You start to worship the created things rather than the Creator. It's a problem that we as human beings have had for a long time. Since the garden, I would suppose. But what do you all make of the restoration of the cathedral? It just as a world historic event. What do you always think about that?
Again, it's amazing, but I think there does. We want to be careful of the idolatry of it all, but that. There's that fine line, but you still want to preserve the past. You want to preserve history. You want to have, we looked at a list the other day of the 50 most beautiful churches in the United States. Yeah. They were ranked one in every state. And just the beauty of them and how they were created. And they weren't created as meaning to be idols. They were created as a meaning to go to a place to worship.
Right.
And I think
give God your best.
Yes, give him your best. And I think that's important to put in context and perspective.
And we may do a show on that too.
I hope we do a show on that because some of those are amazing and amazing places. But I also think that can show the reverence of God and that not be our God in the building and the creation and the physical structure of something.
I'm an architectural geek and an artist geek. And now I've never been to the Cathedral of Notre Dame. But I have been to Il Duomo in Florence, Italy, and I've been to St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. But when I stand in front of Il Duomo, the large cathedral in the center of Florence, and it dominates Florence, and the word awestruck keeps coming to mind, and majestic and powerful and overwhelming. Because this thing was built in the 1300s. Now, Notre Dame was built in the 1200s, 1100s.
I think 1100s.
Yes.
It was begun, at least was started.
Yeah. And the mid 1100s. But the one in Florence, it took over a century, like almost 2 centuries, to build this massive structure, which is incredibly beautiful. Well, when I look at these massive structures, I just keep saying to myself, how did they do that? They only had muscle power, and yet they made these structures that were just 12, 15 stories high or taller. I do not know the exact dimensions off the top of my head. And this stuff is not just stone; it's made out of marble and the gigantic wooden beams. How did they lift it up there and put it into place? And it stayed in place for over 1,000 years?
It had to be a dangerous line of work as well, did it not? I mean, you think you don't have safety harnesses. You're not looking at having the ability to do that. I mean, that's a line of work that it's a lot of risk today.
There had to have been probably a lot of people that died in the process of doing that.
When they were building Il Duomo in Florence, they actually had a bakery up top because the guys weren't coming back down at for lunch. When they had to feed them, they fed them up there, and so they had to think about this. These were brilliant people in thinking. But then when I think about let's say the stonemason in 1160, when he begins work on the Cathedral of Notre Dame, I know that he was probably thinking, I'm doing this for the glory of God. Why are you doing what you're doing? Well, they're going to pay me. Okay, yeah. But I'm going to do it for the glory of God as he understood it. Good. But then he also had to have known, I'm not just doing this for my kids. I'm not doing it for my grandchildren. Because I will never see the finished product. My children will never see the finished product. And probably my grandchildren won't either. I'm doing this for my great-great-grandchildren who will finally see the finished product of what great-great-great-grandpa started with his own 2 hands. And when I think about that, the term legacy comes to mind. We need to have the long game in mind. What are we doing in our lives today that our great-grandchildren will reap the benefits from? I'm not active in church and active at the round table and active in all the other things that I do just to make myself happy. I really want to have something in place for 3 generations from now for the people who will have my last name.
I love that. That brings to mind a quote that I was texting with my dad and brothers from writer John Ruskin, and I'd just like to close this out by reading that. It echoes what you just said. He says, "When we build, let us think that we build forever. Let it not be for present delight nor for present use alone. Let it be such work as our descendants will thank us for. And let us think as we lay stone on stone that a time is to come when those stones will be held sacred because our hands have touched them, and that men will say as they look upon the labor and wrought substance of them, see, this our Father did for us."
The conversations are just getting started. To get connected, check out 1850mainstreet.com. We don't data mine anyone or sell your information. Subscribe today so you don't miss a single conversation. We'll see you next time here at 1850 Main Street.